Hey, welcome, guys. My name is still Leboham Mafa. Today is a very, very important day. We've got our very first guest, Miss Harris Mary from Ipsos. Ipsos are marketing research institution. They are a global leader in that space. We are very, very excited to have you here with us, Miss Harris.
Thank you.
It is indeed a privilege, and we you recently released the results of your survey, which was conducted between May and July, which I must say set the tongues working in political cycles. We would like to have a conversation with you along along those or around those results. And we understand that those are not predictive
No.
results, but nonetheless, they still had people talking, political parties trying to spin things around in as far as those results are concerned. So, without any waste of time, Ms. Harris, I would like you to maybe we can start with clarifying a few things for us. Please tell us in the results, you have the support for the African National Congress and other parties at 42%. And there is also a section or a question that talks to definitely and perhaps. Can you please clarify those two questions for us?
Sure. It's two very different questions. The first question about establishing the support for the party is a straightforward question where we say to people, if there were elections tomorrow, which party would you vote for? And then the interviewer gives the device, whether it's a computer or a tablet or the cell phone, with a ballot paper to the respondent. The respondent then makes their own cross next to the party they choose. In other words, it is very much an imitation of a vote, of a voting day ballot paper that you would see. That is the first question. The other question about definitely vote and probably vote and not vote for it all and whatever, that is more of an attitude question. And we don't ask people which party would you choose. We say to them, how do you feel about the ANC? Which one of these following statements comes closest to how you feel about the ANC? And then they choose one of the statements. So everybody, whether they ANC supporters or not, answer for the ANC. And we ask that of 6 different parties. So we ask it about the ANC, we ask about the DA, we ask about the EFF, Action SA, the IFP, and the Freedom Front. So everybody answers for every party. So it's two very different questions. The intention of the second question is to give people an idea of what their potential support can be. How do they approach people who are warm about them but will not vote for them? So it's more of a strategic question than a straightforward who would you vote for question.
Understood. This I found this results to be quite interesting. More so that the yes, the mood at the moment appears to point to the African National Congress losing significant amount of support. I think in your report you say they establishing themselves as a below 50% organization, political organization. Now, what I find fascinating is the fact that opposition parties, and I'm talking about the 6 that you have focused on in the report, the 5 other ones, they don't seem to be gaining from this loss of support from the African National Congress. Can you please take us through that scenario? Why do you think that is the case, if maybe you may?
It is because there is, since about, well, before 2016, when we had the local government election, there's a mood in the country that people don't have a lot of trust in political parties and also not in political leaders. There's a bit of an alienation away from politics that we have been picking up for 8 or 10 years. It's not unique to South Africa. This alienation happens in other countries as well. We can see the turnout in the last few elections, for instance, the French election, the turnout was very low. In the elections in the US, in some areas, it's at 40% turnout, which is much lower than what we have ever experienced. So this alienation thing is worldwide. I think that's important to get under or in our heads. Then the other thing that's very important is that South Africans are saying 40%, and actually that means 4 out of every 10 people you see say there's no political party that expresses their views. So people feel very strongly that the current political parties are not addressing the things that are important to them. And that is why I think that there are so many of the other political parties who are not necessarily gaining because the ANC is struggling. But still, I think it's very important to remember the ANC is still the biggest party in the country. They have overwhelming support in the country, and they're struggling at the moment, but all political parties are struggling.
Interesting. But what does that tells us about our democracy? Can we say that it's a sign of a healthy, maturing democracy, or do we have a cause for concern? The fact that we instead of people changing their political loyalty to a party that might perhaps deliver better than the African National Congress, they decide to sit at home. What does that say about our state of democracy?
It actually is 6 of the one, half a dozen of the other. On the one side, it says that we need to do something about this political alienation because people, I believe, can't have no input into politics. We are, to a large degree, political animals. We live in a society that's driven by politics. So we always get the government we deserve. I think that's also very important to keep in mind because we make those choices. We can't complain. We're making those choices. So if you're not making a choice, you're not playing the political game. You're not a part of the society really. And
Your
then
voice is not heard.
yeah, your voice must be heard. And then the other half dozen that I wanted to talk about is that, again, this is a worldwide phenomenon, that people more and more start trusting civil society and other organizations. They find other ways of expressing their political ideas. Like, for instance, they would go and demonstrate if they don't agree with something. Rather than engage the powers that be, they will demonstrate and burn and break and whatever else. That is seen as a legitimate way of focusing attention on problems. We might say what we think about it and we might not agree with that, but for a lot of people that's a legitimate way of expressing themselves. And that says something about the democracy as well, because that says the instruments we have of democracy are not sufficient to address the issues of people.
Oh, fascinating. You know, as in response to the survey, Democratic Alliance in particular, I think Helen Zille came out strongly against the results. Said that if people look back into the previous Ipsos results, you have significantly underestimated their support. Understandably, I'm not sure if maybe the understanding is the same, that the results are not predictive of the electoral support, just the window into the mood of the nation at that particular point. Would you perhaps take us through that, or would you like to give us a response to that criticism from Democratic Alliance?
Yes, I can definitely do that. We do 2 big studies a year where we speak to a cross-section of the South African population. We choose the respondents randomly. We actually speak to the sample is representative of the 40 million South Africans who are eligible to vote. But you know, and I know, that only between 26 and 27 million of South Africans are registered to vote. We also know that every time before an election, there's a big drive from the IEC, but also from political parties to get more people registered. So when we are closer to an election, we actually filter the results to only look at registered voters. But it doesn't take away that uncertainty. Last year, before the local government election, in two studies we did, one was 3 weeks before the election, the other one a week before the election. The first one, 25% of voters still said they don't know. And the one a week before the election, 31% of voters who were registered and said they're going to vote still didn't know who they would vote for. So it is a little bit, you do have the snapshot of time. But because we do so many studies, this actually almost evolves into a movie and no longer just a picture or a photograph. And then about Mrs. Ziller's claim about that we forever have the DA support wrong. Examples. In 2014, with the national election, the survey we published just before the election, we said the DA will get 22%. The actual result was 22.23. So it's 0.23 up. In 2016, with the local government election, we said the DA would get 26% nationally. They got 26.9%, 0.9% out. In 2019, with the national election, we said the DA would get 19%. They got 20.8%. So that's 1.8% up. And then last year, with the local government election, I'm ashamed to say we overestimated the support for the DA. We said they would get 24.2%, and nationally, they had 21.65%. So I don't think that criticism holds. The reason is because the DA quite often looks at surveys we publish like a month or two before the election and not at the very last survey, which actually is the prediction. The prediction is never the survey done a few months before an election.
No, what I wanted to ask, in fact, in relation to the explanation you just gave us, is your prediction or your results on the ANC side has appeared to be a little bit more very close to reality. I think from the last results or from the last elections cycle, the local government elections, you were just about 1% out. You polled them at about 49%, and they ended up at about 48%. Why do you think it's easy for you to poll or to get the ANC results as close to reality as possible compared to other small parties?
All surveys, regardless of how they're done, have an inbuilt margin of error. And this margin of error depends on a few things. The sample size, not the universe size, the sample size. Then the response rate, in other words, how people answer this. And then thirdly, the methodology you use. Now, on these big studies we do, the Caiaphas, the response rate is actually, you actually have to look what it is. If it's a 5% or 95%, then the sample error is very low. But if it's a 50-50 split, the sample error is bigger. You can imagine yes or no, 50-50. So that is why it is sometimes easier to predict the biggest parties and the smallest parties, but not those in the middle.
Than the small ones. Oh, all right. One thing that I did not pick up from the results was the provincial split of the results. And I think you and I know and can almost feel it, how fierce the upcoming elections are going to be, especially in your metro provinces like Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal. these are the provinces where the African National Congress has been limping. You'd recall that in the recent local government election, ANC dropped significantly below 50% in KwaZulu-Natal. So was Gauteng. And I can imagine that opposition parties would want to press on that, or would want to capitalize on that weakness in those provinces. Do you, by any chance, do you have a sense of what is the provincial mood in as far as this
Yes,
results are concerned?
not to the last degree in the sense of percentages or whatever, but overall we can talk about this. If we look at the profile of ANC supporters, what I mean with that, if we put all ANC supporters in the country in one place, say for instance in a big stadium, we will need a very big stadium, but we say, how do they look like? We will see that a very large proportion of them actually come from Gauteng, a lot more than from KwaZulu-Natal. And I think that is one of the issues that the ANC have missed out over the last few years, that the development and the growth of their support in Gauteng was actually growing faster than supporting KZN, as you pointed out, that trunk. Currently, I think the competition will be fierce in those provinces you spoke about, but in KZN, they're still well below the 50%, say a little bit less than 40%. In Gauteng, they are one of the biggest parties in Gauteng. So even if they are not quite at the 50% mark in Gauteng, they're just below it.
Oh, this is very interesting. The point you're making, the difference you're making between Gauteng and KwaZulu Natal, and this maybe might be a question on or discussion for another platform with maybe a different guest. But I mean, you would know there is this phenomenon, Jacob Zuma phenomenon, which is which is
Yes.
quite an issue in KwaZulu Natal, because for some reason President Zuma is still quite revered in ANC cycles in KwaZulu Natal, and you would think that that much admiration for him is based on electoral support. But now, if you say that electoral support in KwaZulu-Natal is actually waning, it actually poses sort of an interesting situation, or interesting scenario, which I think maybe one would want to engage with further and move with at a different level. I know it's not part of this conversation, but I still find
Yeah, one
it
can
interesting
scratch,
nonetheless. But
sorry,
moving
Lebo.
back,
One can scratch deeper into these results and see exactly what they are and where they're stronger. Usually the ANC has been stronger in the north of Natal than in the south, but that changed a little bit. And so the big thing is that politics is not static. It moves. There's always a flux. Yeah, yeah.
from time to time, yeah. All right. No, splendid. Now let's move back to the survey results. There's this part. It has not necessarily been talked about, and I found it to be very interesting from the results. Uh, One of the questions in the results uh, talks to the rejection, I would say, of political parties. I think it goes something like, I reject this particular
Yeah.
political party on principle. And when you look at that particular question, you find that the DA appears to be the most rejected, and I hope I understand the question correctly. The DA appears to be the most rejected party with 30%, and in that, from that perspective, African National Congress appears to be the less rejected party. Can you perhaps make us understand the difference between that question of rejection and the waning support of the African National Congress, and vis-a-vis the performance of the DA? So I don't know
Yeah,
if I made
yeah.
sense. I don't know if that question
Let me
is
try to
clear.
answer it, and then you can tell me if it does make sense or not. That question about rejection is part of that that question we spoke about right in the beginning of that you have to give an opinion about every political party. So if you are quite right, there are 30% of South Africans who are eligible to vote who say they reject the DA completely and on principle. There's also 29% who reject the Freedom Front Plus completely and on principle, and 28% who reject the EFF completely and on principle. So clearly we see something here. And unfortunately, it's a racial thing, I think. Because if we look at those rejecting the DA or the Freedom Front Plus completely and on principle, it's usually black people, it's usually older people, who have that struggle tradition that say that they reject this party completely on principle. And with the EFF, I think that is very interesting because there's a mix of people who say that white and black. It's more female than male who say they reject this party completely on principle. And in another place, they say they do not like the rhetoric of the party and they find the party too aggressive. That's the issue that puts the females off. But apart from that, let's look at the ANC. They have an 18% rejection. So has Action SA. Very interesting. The two is exactly the same. 18% rejection figure. And that again comes from all walks of life. It's people who feel strongly that they can't live with this party. So you will always get that in politics, that there are some parties that you can tolerate and other ones that you definitely can't tolerate. And the big thing is just that we have to work in this country to get this not toleration, not to develop into some violence or, violent rejections or killing the councillors of that particular party and so on. That's the danger, that it can actually lead to other more harsher expressions of political will.
Interesting indeed. Look, as perhaps as we move closer to the end of this interview, there's one thing that I wanted to ask, and it is not necessarily part of this survey results, but more into the leadership figures or individuals who are in the main the
Yeah.
figureheads or the faces of the parties. I think the recent results I've seen, they still put President Ramaphosa significantly ahead of many leaders. I think the figure is about 5.5 for President Ramaphosa. There's a wide margin between him and the nearest leader, despite the Pala saga and everything. How do you square up his support, which still remain above 50%, with that of his party? Can you please try to maybe briefly try to make us understand where the
Yeah.
discord is, if
And,
there's any?
it is extremely important that a political leader gets support as well and that there's trust in this political leader and not only in the party. And we also see that rejection thing coming through quite strongly in some of that because you feel stronger about some leaders than about others, either stronger positively or stronger negatively. President Ramaphosa has succeeded in getting support from all walks of life, of all groups in South Africa, whether the people are white, black, colored, Indian, Khoisan, whatever. Um, they look up to him as a leader. And if we look at his support in his own party, it is 7.4 out of 10. So we can actually see that he's very, very well accepted within his own party. However, these results, there's always a however. These
Interesting.
results are of South Africans. It's not of the NEC. That's a different ball game. Yeah. So, but it's extremely important that a leader has equal or more support than his party. And when we measured the same sort of things for President Zuma years ago, the interesting thing was that the ANC had a lot more support than the president. In the end, the president had something like 27% support when 2017, just before he left. So it's really, really very important for a leader, and especially for a president, not only to appeal to your own party, but to appeal to the whole cosmos of South African voters.
Oh, that's very interesting, Ms. Harris. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really hope that in the coming future, as in when you do and release some of this the work that you do in the space, we
Sure.
can engage some more. But for now, I would like us to stop here, and thank you for making time to be with us. Maybe before you leave, I would like to close by saying that, or reminding South Africans that the survey results that you recently released are just a window into the mood of the electorate at that moment. They are not predictive of actual results. Nonetheless, they are very important. They serve as a wake-up call to political parties to start delivering services in a more effective and efficient way. But we have seen in recent past that even when you release those results, oftentimes political parties continue with business as usual. And in which case, we see the results, we see the winning voting, electoral support for some of these parties. And that's what this surveys tells us. They are not predictive. It's just the mood of the society at that particular moment. And for me, I think that's a bigger picture. And we want to thank you for making time to be with us, Ms. Harris, and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you
Until
very,
we
very
meet
much,
again.
and thank you for this opportunity. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much, and thank you for this opportunity. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
All
You
right.
too.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harris. Have a lovely day. Thank you for watching that interesting interview with Ms. Harris, the director from Ipsos. If you like that video, please remember to subscribe on the channel. Would really enjoy and appreciate your support. Like the video and drop us a feedback and let us know how you feel about that interview. We hope to have more of similar content moving forward. And thank you very much.